The inventory listed everything. The oil paintings in the East Corridor, 14 of them, including a portrait of a woman in blue that no one had been able to identify. The mahogany escritoire in the library, cracked along the left leg but otherwise sound. The silver service for 23 pieces missing. The horses, 2 of them too old for riding. The debts. And then, at the bottom of the 3rd page in the solicitor's careful hand, one dependent, status unclear, residing in the East Wing. Gideon Holt, the new Earl of Thornwick, read that line twice. He looked up at Mr. Farrow, the solicitor, who had traveled from London to oversee the transfer of the estate, and said, "What exactly is a dependent?" Mr. Farrow did not quite meet his eyes. "A person, my lord, who was, at the time of the late Earl's passing, living under his roof and reliant upon his household for sustenance. A servant." "Not precisely, my lord." "Then what, precisely?" Mr. Farrow shuffled his papers. Outside the library window, rain was beginning to drag itself across the moors, slow and gray and inevitable. "We were not entirely able to determine that," he said. "She had been in the house for as long as anyone could remember." That was what Mrs. Dowd, the housekeeper, told Gideon on his first morning at Thornwick Hall, when he asked about the woman he had seen crossing the upper landing just before dawn. A slight figure in a dark dress, moving quietly, as though she had learned long ago how to take up less space than she was owed. "Miss Hartley," Mrs. Dowd said, in the tone one uses for matters that have been complicated for a very long time and cannot be made simple. "She assists with the household accounts. She has done since before I arrived, my lord, and that was 11 years ago. Does she live here, in the East Wing?" "Yes." "And she is paid?" Mrs. Dowd hesitated in a way that told Gideon everything. "She is provided for." He thought about that for the rest of the morning. He walked the estate in the rain, which was still coming down, thin and cold and determined. And he thought about a woman who had lived for 11 years in a house that now belonged to him, doing work that no one had seen fit to formalize, sleeping in a wing that had apparently been closed off from the rest of the household, and being described on an official legal document as status unclear. He had bought Thornwick Hall because it was beautiful, and because he had wanted, for the first time in his life, to stop moving. He had not bought it expecting complications of this particular kind. He met her properly that afternoon in the library. She was standing at the long table near the window, a leather-bound ledger open before her, a pen in her hand. She wore a gray dress, plain and well-made, the sort of dress a woman wears when she wants to be overlooked. Her hair was dark and pinned simply. She did not look up when he entered, which he suspected was deliberate. "Miss Hartley," he said, "my lord." She closed the ledger. When she finally turned, he found that her eyes were an unusual shade of amber, very direct, and that she was younger than he had expected. No more than 25, perhaps 26. "I wondered if you might explain your position here," he said, as gently as he could manage. Something moved across her face. Not quite emotion, more like the preparation for it quickly set aside. "I manage the household accounts," she said. "I have done so for several years. I can show you the ledgers if you wish. Everything is in order." "I'm sure it is." He paused. "That's not quite what I meant." She looked at him for a moment, steady and measuring, and then she looked away, back toward the window and the gray afternoon beyond it. "I know what you meant, my lord," she said. "I simply don't know how to answer it." Her name was not Hartley. She had not always been Miss Hartley. That name had belonged to her mother's family. Her mother, who had died when she was 4 years old, and who existed in her memory only as a scent, something like lavender and candle wax, and as the particular feeling of being carried up a staircase at night, safe and half asleep. Her name, her real name, the one that appeared in the parish register at the church in the village of Thornwick, the one that her father had chosen and her mother had agreed to in the weeks before she was born, was Beatrice Caldwell. Her father had been the 5th Earl of Thornwick. She did not think about this most of the time. Or rather, she had learned not to think about it, the way one learns not to press a bruise. Not because the bruise isn't there, but because pressing it does nothing useful. She was 24 years old. She had lived in the East Wing of Thornwick Hall for 6 years, since the moment it became clear to her that if she did not find a way to stay close to the estate, she would lose all connection to it entirely. She had come back after her schooling in York, which had been paid for by her father, out of what she now understood was guilt. He had told the school she was the orphaned daughter of a distant cousin. He had told the household she was a distant relation of Mrs. Dowd's who had fallen on difficult circumstances. He had told her, when she was old enough to ask, which had happened on a cold Tuesday morning when she was 17, and found a portrait of herself in a locked room at the top of the East Wing, painted when she was perhaps 3 years old, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her amber eyes wide. He had told her that the situation was complicated. She had looked at the portrait for a long time, and then she had looked at her father, who was already ill by then, already beginning the slow and painful process of becoming someone who had once been powerful, and she had said, very quietly, "I understand." She had not understood, but she had said it because she could see that he needed her to. He died the following spring. He did not, in any document that Beatrice was able to find, acknowledge her. He did not leave her anything. He sold the estate 6 months before his death to a man she had never heard of, Gideon Holt, who had made his money in shipping and trade, and apparently wanted a house in the north of England, and he wrote her a letter, which Mrs. Dowd gave her on the morning after the funeral, sealed with the Thornwick crest. She had read it 4 times. Then she had put it in the locked drawer of the escritoire in her sitting room in the East Wing, and she had gone back to the accounts. She had not expected him to ask again. Most people, she had found, were satisfied by an incomplete answer if it was delivered with enough composure. They wanted to believe that complicated things were actually simple. They wanted to be permitted to move on. She had spent 6 years giving people exactly enough information to stop asking questions, and it had worked remarkably well. Gideon Holt, apparently, was not most people. He knocked on the door of the East Wing study 3 days after their first conversation. She had been reading one of the old histories of the estate that she had found in the library as a girl, before she had known what she was looking for in them. She opened the door and found him standing in the corridor with a lamp, because the East Wing was not always well lit, and an expression on his face that she could not quite categorize. "I found something," he said, "and I think it may belong to you." He held out a small miniature portrait, oval-framed, the paint slightly faded. It showed a young woman, dark-haired, amber-eyed, in a white dress. On the back, in a hand she recognized immediately as her father's, were the words, "B. August 1818. She had been 2 years old in August 1818. She took the miniature carefully. She did not say anything for a long moment. "There's more," Gideon said. He was watching her with that look she was beginning to recognize, careful, quiet, not unkind. "I was going through the papers in the study, the ones that hadn't been gone through properly before the transfer. There was a packet of letters." He paused. "Addressed to you." She looked up. "They were sealed," he said quickly. "I didn't read them. I don't know what they say. But your name was on them, your real name, I think. Beatrice." She had not heard anyone say that name in 6 years. She sat down, which was not something she had planned to do, and the miniature portrait was still in her hand, and the lamp that Gideon Holt was holding cast a warm and slightly unsteady light across the corridor of the house where she had spent her entire childhood without anyone once saying her name out loud. "I'm sorry," he said. He did not say it the way people say it when they don't mean it. He said it the way people say it when they understand, at least approximately what the weight of a thing is. "I'm sorry. I don't know the whole story. I'm not sure I need to. But I think you do." She opened the first letter that night, alone. Her father had written 11 of them. He had written them over the course of the last 2 years of his life, each one dated. Each one beginning "My dear Beatrice," in the careful and slightly shaking hand of a man who was already ill and already frightened. He had not written them to be sent. She understood that immediately. He had written them because he was dying, and because there were things he had never said, and he had discovered, too late, that silence has a weight to it that only increases over time. He wrote about her mother. He wrote about the morning Beatrice had been born, in the middle of a January snowstorm, in a room on the second floor that was now a sitting room, and how he had held her and looked at her face and felt something he had not expected and did not know what to do with. He wrote about the years her mother had been alive. 3 years, only 3 years, not long enough, and about what it had been like to watch her mother's family arrive after the funeral and explain, with perfect courtesy and absolute firmness, that the marriage, while not illegal, had been conducted in circumstances that made certain interpretations of Beatrice's status complicated. He wrote about his own failure. He did not excuse it. He wrote about the decision he had made, which was to protect the title and the estate above everything else, including his daughter, and about how he had told himself for 20 years that he had done the right thing and had only recently, finally, stopped believing it. He had sold the estate because he had needed the money for the debts. That part was true, and she had known it. But he had also sold it, he wrote, because he had realized that she loved it more than he did, and that a house that was sold could still be lived in by the right arrangement, whereas a house that was inherited correctly would pass to his male heir and she would have no claim upon it at all. He had tried, in the only way he knew how, to give her a place to stay. She read all 11 letters in a single sitting, in the chair by the window of the East Wing study, with the lamp burning low beside her. When she finished, she sat for a long time in the dark, and then she looked out at the moors, which were silver and still under a half-moon, and she thought about her father, who had been a coward and a fool, and who had loved her, badly, imperfectly, in the only way he had known how. She did not cry. Or she did cry, a little, but not in the way she had expected. It was not grief, exactly. It was something quieter. The particular feeling of being able to set down a thing you have been carrying for a very long time. She told Gideon 3 days later, not everything, not the letters, not yet, not all of it, but enough. She told him who her father was. She told him what she was. She told him why she had stayed, and what name she had been using, and why the East Wing study contained 11 years of meticulous account books in handwriting that would hold up to any examination. He listened. He did not interrupt. He was very still in the way that she was beginning to understand, meant that he was paying attention. When she finished, he said, "So you're the late Earl's daughter?" "Yes." "And you've been managing the household accounts for 6 years?" "Yes." "For no wages?" She hesitated. "For a place to live." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Miss," and stopped. "What would you like me to call you?" It was such a simple question. She had not been asked it in a very long time. "Beatrice," she said. "My name is Beatrice." The trouble arrived on a Wednesday morning. His name was Mr. Stanton Greer, her father's solicitor from the old firm in Leeds, a small man with the manner of someone who has been delivering unwelcome news for so long that he has ceased to feel it as anything other than professional obligation. He arrived with 2 other men, both of them in good coats, both of them with the careful, controlled expression of people who are about to make a claim. The claim, it turned out, was being made on behalf of her father's nephew, a man named Rupert, who was the son of her father's younger brother, and who had, at the time of the estate's sale, been living in Edinburgh, and apparently unaware that his uncle's death was imminent. He had since become aware of several things, including the terms of the entail, the manner of the sale, and the existence of a woman living in the east wing of the house who was claiming, or who had apparently told someone, possibly Mrs. Dowd, possibly the cook, to be the late Earl's daughter. The claim, in short, was this: if Beatrice was who she said she was, then the estate sale might be legally questionable, because her father had sold it to settle debts that should have been settled differently, and certain questions about the legitimacy of that transaction were worth Rupert's solicitor's phrase, examination. What Rupert actually wanted, Beatrice understood immediately, was not justice. What Rupert wanted was leverage. Gideon met with the solicitors in the library. She was not in the room, but Mrs. Dowd told her afterward, with the careful loyalty of a woman who has watched a household for 11 years and has her own opinions about who deserves what, that the Earl had been. Mrs. Dowd paused, searching for the word, unmoved. That was the word she used. Unmoved. That evening, Gideon came to the East Wing study. He sat down in the chair across from her, and he looked at the fire for a moment before he said anything. Greer's men are trying to suggest that the sale was improper, he said. They're not going to be able to prove it. The transaction was entirely legal, and Farrow's firm is very good, but they could make noise about it for long enough to be inconvenient. I know, she said. This is my fault. I'm sorry. He looked at her then, and his expression was something she had not seen on a person's face in a long time. It was not quite surprise. It was the look of someone who has just heard something said incorrectly and is trying to decide how to respond. It is not your fault, he said, that your father acknowledged you badly and his nephew has decided to profit from the situation. She did not know what to say to that. I have a proposal, he said, and I want you to understand that I'm making it because it is the right thing to do, not because I need anything from you or expect anything in return. She waited. Your father acknowledged you in those letters, he said. He may not have done it in a legal document, but the letters are evidence, 11 letters, in his own hand, with dates, with your name. If you were willing to let Farrow's firm see them, they could use that to close the door on Greer's claims permanently. Because if you are publicly acknowledged as the late Earl's daughter, Rupert has no standing. He's not the heir, he's simply a nephew, and his grievance evaporates. And in exchange? She said. He looked slightly startled. Nothing, he said. There's no exchange. I'm saying that if you let me help you, I can make sure that what your father wrote is finally, properly used for what he meant it to do. She thought about the letters. She thought about the portrait in the locked room, and the miniature, and the inventory with its line about a dependent, status unclear. She thought about what it meant to have been living in a house for 6 years as someone who did not exist. All right, she said. It took 6 weeks. Farrow's firm was, as Gideon had said, very good. The letters were examined, attested to, and entered into a formal process that Beatrice did not entirely follow, but that resulted, at the end of the 6 weeks, in a legal acknowledgement, not of her right to inherit the estate, which had been sold and was not in question, but of her identity. She was, officially and finally, Beatrice Caldwell, the late Earl of Thornwick's legitimate daughter. Her parents' marriage, which had been conducted quietly in a small church in Derbyshire in the spring of 1815, and had been treated by her father's family as a convenience to be forgotten, was confirmed as valid. Rupert's solicitors withdrew. Mrs. Dowd made a cake. The cook, whose name was Mrs. Beery, and who had been feeding Beatrice since she was a child, and pretending not to know her, made a second one, on the grounds that one cake was not sufficient for the occasion. The old gardener, a taciturn man named Peck, who had worked at Thornwick Hall for 30 years, and had watched Beatrice grow up in the East Wing, and never once asked about it, presented her with a cutting from the climbing rose by the kitchen garden door, which he had been propagating for years, and which was, he said, the best one on the property. She planted it herself, against the south wall of the house, in a spot where it would get the morning light. She did not expect what came next, or perhaps she did, in the way that one sometimes knows a thing without allowing oneself to know it. In the way that she had noticed, over the previous months, that Gideon Holt was not quite like anyone she had met before, and that his particular habit of being quiet and then saying exactly the right thing had become, without her quite deciding it, something she looked forward to. She had noticed that he laughed at things she said, genuine laughter, not the polite kind. She had noticed that when he was in the same room with her, the room felt slightly different. She had noticed these things and set them aside, because she was practical, and because she had spent 6 years learning to want only the things she could actually have. He found her in the library one afternoon in late October, not looking at a ledger for once, but reading one of the old natural history books that had been on the shelves since before she was born. She had read it several times as a child, and she was reading it again now, which felt like reclaiming something. He sat across from her. He did not have a pretext. He just sat down, as though the library were a place where people were allowed to simply exist. "I have something to ask you," he said, after a moment. She looked up. "I want to ask you properly," he said, "not in the middle of a legal conversation or because of anything that is still unresolved. Everything is resolved now, so I'm asking because I want to." She put the book down. "I've been thinking about this since the morning I found the miniature," he said, "and I'm aware that sounds abrupt and I don't mean it to. I mean that He paused, which was unusual for him. He was generally a man who knew what he wanted to say. "I mean that I knew that morning that you were someone I wanted to know better, and I have known you better now, and that has not changed." "You're asking me to marry you," she said. "Yes." "You don't have to," she said. "I'm not. This isn't a situation that requires resolution through marriage. My name is settled. I have a position here that is—" "Beatrice," he said. She stopped. "I'm not asking because I have to," he said. "I'm asking because I would like to have you in my life for the rest of it, and this seems like the most honest way to say so." The fire was low. The afternoon light came in through the library windows and lay across the floor in long, quiet bars. Outside, the moors were beginning to go golden brown with the season, the same moors she had looked out at her whole life, first as a child who did not know what she was, and then as a young woman who knew too well, and now as someone who had, finally, been given back her own name. "Yes," she said. "All right, yes." They were married in the Thornwick village church on a Saturday in December, which was cold and clear, with frost on the grass and a sky so blue it looked like something someone had painted too enthusiastically. Mrs. Dowd cried. She denied this afterward, but her handkerchief told a different story. The climbing rose by the south wall was dormant, of course, this time of year. But Peck had told Beatrice, when she planted it, that it would bloom in late May. A deep pink, almost red, very fragrant, the kind of rose that established itself quickly, and then stayed for decades without much encouragement. She thought about that on the morning of the wedding, looking out at the south wall, at the dark bare canes with their small promising buds already waiting for spring. The house stood at the end of the long drive behind the oaks, the same as it always had, the same as it had stood when she was a child and when her mother had been alive, and when all of this had been something other than it was now. It was a very old house. It had seen a great many things. She had spent a long time in it waiting to be found. What she had not known, and what she thought about now, was that being found was not the same thing as being seen. Anyone could find you. Very few people looked at what they had found and decided without being asked that it was worth keeping. She put on her coat. She picked up her gloves from the chair by the window, the same chair she had sat in the night. She read her father's letters, the chair that looked out over the moors. Then she went downstairs, and she walked out into the December morning, and she let the door of Thornwick Hall close behind her. She was not leaving. She was coming back. There is a difference, and she had learned it the hard way, and she knew it now in the way that you only know things you have had to find out for yourself. Not as a fact, but as a feeling, settled and sure, like roots that have finally found their depth.